professional engineer practicing for 16 years in the province of Ontario, and I'm very excited to share one of my favorite topics with you, environmental protection regulations. I'm going to stop my video because I don't want the connection to be unstable, and then share my presentation. Okay, so what I would like to talk to you tonight is about Environmental Protection Act of Ontario and what it says about Ontario's air quality protection. What is being presented here tonight is my personal interpretation and my professional opinion on all the subjects and should not be used as legal advice. Ontario's environmental legislation include a variety of acts and regulations. The main acts that are related to environmental protection include Environmental Bill of Rights Act, Environmental Assessment Act, Environmental Protection Act, Water Resources Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Clean Water Act, and Nutrient Management Act. Each one of these acts has a dozen or more regulations under them that determine how the environment should be protected in this province. But tonight, we're going to focus on Environmental Protection Act, which is the main piece of legislation. The purpose of this act is to provide for the protection and conservation of the natural environment. The main paragraph of the Act says that no person shall discharge into the natural environment any contaminant in levels in excess of what is prescribed by the regulations. So what it's trying to say is that discharges into the environment are allowed under the law to some extent, but no one can start discharging contaminants without permission if they cannot abide by the law. One of the main concepts introduced in this piece of legislation is adverse effect. Basically, the law says that you cannot discharge a contaminant that will cause an adverse effect in this province. An adverse effect is defined by anything that will cause impairment in the quality of the natural environment, could cause injury or damage to property, plant, animal life, human life, cause an adverse effect on human health, or cause the loss of enjoyment of normal use of property and interfere with the normal conduct of business. The reason that this concept is really important is that it includes a variety of issues that can come about if there is a discharge into the environment without the impacts being properly assessed and being allowed. So Section 9 of the Environmental Protection Act strictly talks about air emissions. It says that no person is allowed to discharge into the natural environment using, operating, constructing a plant or a structure, which refers to industrial facilities, without an environmental compliance approval into a natural environment other than water. So natural environment other than water refers to air, and it says that you are obligated to work according to an environmental compliance approval if you're operating an industrial facility in this province. Now, what is a contaminant? The law strictly defines contaminant to be a discharge that is from a human activity, directly or indirectly. And it includes sound, vibration, heat, odor, radiation, and potentially light. The next concept that the law is talking about is environmental compliance approval. And that is a legal instrument or a permission that prescribes what is allowed to be emitted into the environment. How does the ministry issue an environmental compliance approval? Proposals are submitted by owners or operators of industrial facilities related to these activities, demonstrating that they meet ministry's regulations and guidelines that define the limits of acceptable environmental risk. Ministry reviews these proposals and issues an approval if the requirements are met. Okay, so my favorite piece of legislation under the Environmental Protection Act is Ontario's Regulation 419, local air quality. This regulation addresses the limits of air emissions based on impacts on human health and natural environment. It defines the methods that can be used to estimate and predict the impacts of air emissions, and some of the tools such as air dispersion models that can be referenced in the reports that are submitted to the ministry. It also talks about other methods of reducing emissions other than obtaining an environmental complaints approval to reduce the impacts of industry on our environment. Now, I'd like to take a minute or two to talk about air dispersion modeling. What I find about air dispersion modeling to be really interesting is that it is a series of mathematical equations that simulate how air pollutants move in the atmosphere. These air dispersion modeling tools get more sophisticated by the year. And they use better algorithms every year to solve these mathematical equations. What goes into an air dispersion model includes wind speed, wind direction, temperature, terrain height, source dimensions, emission rates, and a lot of other different factors in order to predict where the emissions go, how they move, and where they land. This diagram shows all the factors that are considered when somebody is conducting air dispersion modeling. As you can see, even predicting radioactivity and decay could be part of a very sophisticated model. Now, you might ask, what about noise or odor? Well, noise and odor are considered a nuisance. And the reason is that they cause the loss of enjoyment of life or property, which means you may be really annoyed by a bad odor or a really loud noise, but impacts depend on the individual sensitivity. Therefore, Ontario regulates these nuisances through guidelines rather than health-based standards. For example, Environmental Noise Guideline, NPC 300, is a very comprehensive document that lists sound level limits for stationary sources such as industrial and commercial establishments, limits and guidelines that can be used when cities are conducting land use planning, and municipalities can use some of these sound level limits in their noise control bylaws. In this document, there are also sound level limits for aggregate resource extraction and mining activities. Well, thank you so much for listening to this presentation. Please stay vigilant. If you ever witness any pollution spillage, loud noises, bad odors, or waste being dumped in our natural environment, call Ministry's Spill Action Center, which takes the calls 24 hours a day.